Being home alone always gave me a mix of freedom and unease. The quietness of the house could be comforting, but it also made every creak and rustle seem amplified, creating an eerie symphony that played on my nerves. One evening, my parents had gone out for a dinner party, leaving me with the house to myself. I settled in for a relaxing night, planning to watch a thriller on TV and snack on some popcorn. The warm glow of the screen and the familiarity of my surroundings felt reassuring. As the movie flickered on, a faint ringing sound intruded into the room. I glanced around, trying to pinpoint its source. The sound was subtle at first, almost like a distant memory. Yet, as time went on, it grew louder and more insistent. Annoyed by the interruption, I paused the movie and followed the sound. It led me to the hallway, where an old landline phone sat on a table. Its screen displayed an unfamiliar number, and curiosity got the better of me. I picked up the receiver, wondering who could be calling at such a late hour.
Hello.
I spoke into the receiver, unsure of what to expect. The silence on the other end was unsettling. I could sense a presence on the line, as if someone was waiting, listening.
I can see you,
the voice finally hissed, a cold shiver running down my spine. My heart raced, and I quickly hung up the phone. Feeling the weight of the dark outside pressing against the glass, desperation drove me to call my parents, seeking reassurance. They dismissed my fear, attributing it to a prank call. Their words were meant to console, but the unease lingered like a shadow. I turned to the TV for distraction, hoping the moving images could drown out my fear. Yet every sound in the house seemed magnified, and I jumped at the slightest noise. Hours dragged on, and I decided it was time to sleep. I climbed into bed, pulling the covers tight around me, but as I closed my eyes, I thought I heard footsteps outside my window. Panic surged within me as I strained my ears to listen. A shadow passed over the window, and I gasped, my heart pounding in my chest. Fear held me captive in my own room, and I clutched my phone like a lifeline. Dialing 911, I waited as the operator's voice provided a sense of connection to the outside world. The approaching sirens brought relief, their flashing lights chasing away the darkness that had consumed me. Police arrived, and I watched from my window as they searched the area. Their presence offered comfort, though the lingering dread remained. The encounter had forever changed the way I viewed my sanctuary, turning it into a battleground between safety and the unknown. The ordeal left its mark, a reminder that even in the confines of my home, I was vulnerable to the terrors that lurked beyond its walls. This happened to me back in 2017 when I was 15 years old. My parents were out of town for a family gathering, leaving me to hold down the fort. I had just finished preparing a simple dinner and settled onto the couch, wrapped in a cozy blanket, ready to indulge in a good book. As the night deepened, the house seemed to settle into its own rhythm. The gentle hum of the air conditioning mixed with the occasional gust of wind outside, creating an oddly soothing symphony. I was engrossed in my book when a faint scratching sound caught my attention. I paused, listening intently. It was probably just a tree branch brushing against a window pane, I reasoned, trying to shake off the unease that crawled up my spine. Returning to my book, I did my best to ignore the persistent scratching. However, it grew louder, more insistent. A feeling of dread gripped me, and I decided to investigate the source of the noise. The sound led me to the kitchen, where I discovered the back door slightly ajar. Panic surged within me. I was certain I had locked that door earlier. My heart pounded as I slowly pushed the door shut, securing the latch. Unease settled in my stomach as I retraced my steps back to the living room. I tried to lose myself in my book once again, but an unsettling sensation crept over me. It was as if the walls held secrets that were inching their way into the forefront of my consciousness. Then I heard it. A soft whisper, like the murmur of voices just beyond my hearing range. I strained my ears, trying to make out the words, but they remained elusive. My pulse quickened, and I felt a chill that seemed to seep from the very walls around me. I knew I was alone, yet the whispers persisted. They seemed to encircle me, growing louder and more sinister. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt an overwhelming sense of being watched. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, dialing my best friend's number. As soon as she answered, I blurted out my fears, explaining the strange occurrences that had been haunting me. She offered words of comfort, suggesting it might be my imagination playing tricks on me. Even as we spoke, the whispers seemed to grow louder, as if mocking my efforts to rationalize them away. I clung to my friend's voice, her words a lifeline in the midst of the inexplicable. Finally, she suggested I turn on all the lights and play some music to drown out the eerie sounds. Following her advice, I flicked on every light switch, filling the house with a warm glow. I selected an upbeat playlist and let the music envelop me. Gradually, the whispers receded, fading into the background as the music asserted its dominance. The atmosphere in the house shifted, and a semblance of normalcy returned. As the night wore on, I realized that I had confronted something beyond the ordinary. Whether it was a figment of my imagination or a presence from another realm, I couldn't be certain. What I did know was that being home alone had revealed a world of uncertainties that lurked just beyond the familiar. The whispers remained a mystery, a reminder that even within the sanctuary of my own home, there were corners of darkness that could shatter the illusion of safety. This happened back in my high school days. I was engrossed in an intense gaming session with my friends on a Discord call. The house was cloaked in silence, except for the clattering of my keyboard and the digital chaos unfolding on my monitor. Amid the excitement, a hushed voice cut through the conversation. One of my friends swore they had heard something, a faint whisper in the background. We laughed it off, attributing it to their overactive imagination or a strange quirk of the digital connection. But curiosity gnawed at me. I paused the game and slipped off my headset, suddenly attuned to the quiet that had settled around me. The house seemed eerily still, the familiar creaks and groans of the floorboards taking on a sinister edge. I announced my intention to investigate, leaving the call momentarily as my friends continued their virtual escapades. With cautious steps, I ventured into the dimly lit hallway, my heart beating faster with each passing moment. The shadows played tricks on my mind, the darkness seeming to warp and twist with every glance. I switched on the hallway light, the sudden brightness chasing away the encroaching dread. The house was empty. As I scanned my surroundings, I reassured myself that I was merely succumbing to the paranoia that can grip anyone alone in the silence. But then, from behind a partially closed door, a faint rustling reached my ears. My breath caught in my throat, and a shiver ran down my spine. I knew that I couldn't ignore it, that I had to confront whatever was causing this unsettling disturbance. With trepidation, I inched closer to the door, my heart pounding so loudly that I was certain the entire house could hear it. The rustling persisted, accompanied by a soft scraping sound that made my skin crawl. My mind raced, conjuring images of the sinister unknown that could be lurking on the other side. Summoning every ounce of courage, I pushed the door open, my fingers trembling as they made contact with the cool wood. And there, bathed in the faint glow of the hallway light, I saw it, a shadowy figure hunched over, its back turned to me. Fear gripped me, but I couldn't let it paralyze me. I reached for my phone, dialed 911, and whispered my location and the situation to the dispatcher. My voice was barely audible, the gravity of the moment pressing down on me. As I spoke, the figure turned, revealing a face etched with surprise and panic. In that chilling instant, I saw the glint of the knife clutched tightly in their hand. It was a sight that shattered any illusion of safety and catapulted me into a heart-pounding confrontation. My pulse raced as the intruder's eyes locked onto mine, the knife a stark reminder of the danger that had invaded my sanctuary. I backed away slowly, my phone pressed against my ear, my voice a trembling plea for help. Outside, the sirens blared to life, a symphony of salvation that cut through the tension-laden air. The intruders' resolve wavered, their panic growing as they realized that their actions had consequences. Moments later, the police stormed into the house, their commanding presence a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded. The intruder was apprehended, their weapon taken from them, and the once intimidating figure was reduced to a mere shadow of their former self. The officers assured me that I was safe, their professionalism a beacon of reassurance in the aftermath of the ordeal. They escorted the intruder away, their presence banishing the darkness that had clouded the night. During the summer of 2019, I embarked on a camping trip with a group of friends. We chose a secluded spot near a tranquil lake, far from the hustle and bustle of city life. What was meant to be a fun and carefree adventure took an unexpected turn into a chilling experience that none of us could have anticipated. Our camping trip began with excitement as we set up our tents and gathered around a cozy campfire. We spent the day hiking, fishing, and sharing stories under the starlit sky. The crackling fire and the soothing sounds of nature put us at ease as we settled in for the night. As darkness enveloped the campsite, we retired to our tents, ready to rest after an eventful day. I zipped up my sleeping bag, trying to ignore the faint rustling noises that seemed to echo from the woods. At first, I attributed the sounds to animals scurrying around in search of food. However, the rustling sounds persisted, growing louder and more deliberate. My heart raced as I strained to listen, realizing that the noises were coming from just beyond our campsite. I exchanged uneasy glances with my friends, who had also taken notice of the unsettling commotion. Then, the sounds changed. It was no longer a gentle rustling. Instead, we heard distinct footsteps crunching on twigs and leaves. The footsteps were deliberate and purposeful, causing an eerie tension to settle over us. Our initial sense of security vanished, replaced by a growing sense of unease. One of my friends suggested that it might be another camper who had lost their way or was wandering too close to our camp. We decided to call out, asking if anyone was there. To our surprise, there was no response, only the sound of footsteps coming to a halt. An unsettling silence descended upon the camp as we strained to see through the darkness. We grabbed our flashlights, their beams cutting through the night as we scanned the area. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a chilling whisper, unintelligible words carried by the wind. My heart raced as I turned to my friends, their faces reflecting the same mixture of fear and confusion that I felt. We were no longer convinced that the footsteps belonged to a lost camper. Something about the situation felt deeply wrong, as if an unwanted presence was lurking just beyond our vision. We debated whether to pack up and leave immediately or to stay put and wait for morning. The thought of venturing into the darkness to pack our things was almost as daunting as staying in place, unsure of who or what might be nearby. Our sense of vulnerability was overwhelming, and it became clear that none of us were willing to sleep that night. We spent the remainder of the night huddled together in our tents, listening intently for any sign of movement or sound. As the first light of dawn broke, we ventured cautiously outside, relieved to find no trace of the mysterious visitor. To this day, we can't explain what happened that night. Was it a curious animal, a lost camper, or something more sinister? Whatever the case, the experience left a lasting impact on all of us. This happened to me in the late fall of 2015. I decided to embark on a solo camping trip in a remote forest area near my town in Vermont. I arrived at the campsite early in the afternoon, eager to set up my tent and immerse myself in the beauty of the wilderness. The tall trees provided ample shade, and the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant songs of birds seemed to welcome me to this peaceful haven. I spent the day exploring, fishing by the nearby stream, and basking in the serenity that surrounded me. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I gathered wood for a campfire and sat down to enjoy a meal cooked over the open flames. With a satisfied stomach and a sense of contentment, I settled into my sleeping bag inside the tent, ready to let the natural symphony of the night make me fall asleep. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, I awoke to the unsettling feeling that I was being watched somewhere from the forest. My heart raced as I peered out of the tent, scanning the darkness for any signs of movement. My flashlight revealed nothing out of the ordinary, and I chalked up the sensation to my imagination playing tricks on me. Attempting to calm my nerves, I lay back down, but sleep proved elusive. The feeling of being watched persisted, and a nagging unease settled in the pit of my stomach. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I drifted into a restless slumber. The next day, I went about my activities with a lingering sense of unease, unable to shake off the feeling that I was not alone. As I gathered firewood, I caught a glimpse of someone standing among the trees on the edge of the campsite. It was a brief glimpse, but the image of their figure sent shivers down my spine. Struggling to maintain my composure, I called out a tentative greeting, hoping to dispel the tension that had gripped me. The figure simply stood there, unmoving, its face obscured by the shadows. I felt a growing sense of dread, an instinctual understanding that this encounter was not a chance one. The figure melted into the shadows before I could discern any more details, leaving me both bewildered and deeply unsettled. I spent the day contemplating the encounter, unsure of what to make of it. Was it a fellow camper or something more sinister? The uncertainty gnawed at me, casting a shadow over what was meant to be a rejuvenating experience. As night fell once again, I couldn't shake the feeling of impending danger. Every rustling leaf and distant sound seemed to amplify my anxiety. In a desperate attempt to calm my racing thoughts, I began telling myself that I was being paranoid, that the previous night's encounter was likely nothing more than a trick of the mind. As I lay in my tent, I listened intently to the sounds of the forest, hoping to catch any indication of the figure's presence. Hours passed, and the quietude of the woods was broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl. Just as I was beginning to believe that my fears were baseless, I heard a faint rustling outside my tent. I held my breath, straining to hear any further movement. My heart pounded in my chest as the rustling grew closer, accompanied by the soft sound of footsteps. Panic surged through me as I realized that someone was outside my tent, moving deliberately and methodically. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone and dialed 911, whispering my location and my situation as quietly as possible. My voice trembled as I explained that I was alone in the woods, being stalked by an unknown individual. The operator assured me that help was on the way, and I prayed that they would arrive in time. My heart raced as I continued to listen to the footsteps circling my tent, the rustling growing louder and more frenzied. It felt like an eternity before I heard the distant sound of sirens approaching. Relief flooded over me as the lights of the police vehicles illuminated the darkness, chasing away the sinister presence that had haunted me. The police arrived, searching the area meticulously. Moments later, they emerged from the woods, leading a man in handcuffs. My heart pounded as I caught sight of his face, the same face that had haunted my thoughts since our initial encounter. He had a knife on him, confirming the danger that had been lurking in the shadows. As the police took the man away, they assured me that I was safe now. I thanked them profusely, feeling a mixture of gratitude and lingering fear. The encounter served as a chilling reminder of the thin veil that separates safety from danger. To this day, the memory of that camping trip haunts me. So I decided to head out for a camping adventure in Sweden. I'd heard all about the gorgeous landscapes and wanted a taste of that natural beauty. So I'm in the middle of the Swedish wilderness, surrounded by dense forests and a serene lake. It's all calm and quiet, and I'm thinking I've hit the jackpot for a tranquil getaway. Set up my tent, packed some grub, and was all set for a chill time. First couple of days were awesome. Hiked, fished, and soaked in the breathtaking views. It was like something out of a postcard. Nights were equally cool. Roasting marshmallows by the campfire, staring up at the stars. You know, all that good stuff. But then, things took a turn for the seriously bizarre. So on the third night, I start noticing that the usual sounds of the wild are totally gone. No rustling leaves, no chirping birds, just dead silence. And I mean, I get it. Nature has its moods, but this was a whole new level of quiet. And that's when the heebie-jeebies kicked in. Suddenly, the peaceful vibe was swapped out for this creepy feeling like something was off. I was on high alert, scanning the dark like a detective. My chill campfire sesh had transformed into a full-on, is that a twig snapping, paranoia fest. Then, out of nowhere, the normal silence was replaced with a faint whispering, like ghostly voices carried on the wind. Now, I'm not a superstitious person, but my skin was crawling. I listened real close, trying to catch what they were saying, but it was all gibberish. The whispers seemed to come from every direction, closing in on me like a weird echo chamber. I wasn't about to be some horror movie cliché, so I ducked into my tent and whipped out my phone, ready to call for backup. As I'm explaining the whole deal to the 911 operator, I can feel the tension rising. They tell me they're sending help, but every second feels like an eternity. Finally, I hear footsteps in the distance, like angels singing in hiking boots. Search and rescue to the rescue. Their headlights sliced through the darkness, and I've never been happier to see a group of people in my life. The whispers faded into thin air, and the rescuers were like a beacon of normalcy. They assured me I wasn't going crazy, that atmospheric stuff can mess with your head sometimes. I mean, sure, that's logical and all, but that night, it was like I'd stumbled into an alternate reality. And let me tell you, those rescue folks were like my personal saviors. So my camping trip turned into an encounter with the Twilight Zone, a reminder that Mother Nature has her tricks. Sweden's wilderness, you're beautiful and all, but I didn't sign up for a supernatural sound show. And even though we got to the bottom of it, that eerie night will stay with me, a reminder that even in the most serene places, nature can throw you a real curveball. Back when I was in college around 2016, I had a strange encounter that left me completely unnerved. I was studying at a university known for its old and historic campus. One night, during finals week, I found myself alone in the library, trying to finish up an assignment due the next day. It was late, and the library was nearly empty except for a few other students buried in their books. The air felt heavy with the weight of stress and exhaustion. Hours went by, and the library grew eerily quiet. I glanced around and noticed a figure standing near one of the bookshelves. It was a man, wearing old-fashioned clothes that looked out of place. He had a pale complexion and a distant, unsettling stare. I quickly turned my attention back to my work, hoping to ignore the strange presence. However, the feeling of being watched only intensified. Every time I looked up, the man seemed to be closer, as if he were moving without actually walking. My heart raced as I realized that there was no way he could have covered that distance without me noticing. I decided to leave the library, my anxiety reaching a breaking point. As I gathered my things, I could feel his gaze fixated on me. I hurriedly made my way to the exit, trying to shake off the growing unease. Once outside, I paused to catch my breath and glanced back at the library. To my shock, the man was standing by the window on the upper floor, staring down at me with a chilling grin. I walked away as fast as I could, my mind racing with fear and confusion. I didn't understand what I had witnessed, and I didn't want to stick around to find out. That night, I couldn't shake off the feeling that the man's gaze was still on me, even when I was safely back in my dorm room. To this day, I have no explanation for that encounter. Was it a ghost? A figment of my exhausted imagination? Whatever it was, it left me with a lingering sense of dread whenever I think about that night in the library. During my college days, I found myself enrolled in a psychology class that proved to be more unsettling than I could have imagined. It was a sprawling lecture hall with rows upon rows of students, each seat seemingly occupied by the time I arrived. As a student who preferred to blend in, I slipped into an empty seat toward the back. On that particular day, the professor was discussing abnormal psychology. It was an engaging topic, yet the air in the room felt strangely heavy. It didn't take long for me to realize that I was being watched. I glanced around, and that's when I saw him, a guy seated a few rows ahead, his eyes fixed on me. Now, I've always considered myself fairly perceptive, and this guy's intense gaze set off alarm bells in my mind. It wasn't the kind of lingering glance that can be brushed off. It was more like a predator assessing its prey. I averted my eyes, hoping that maybe my imagination was getting the best of me. But throughout the lecture, I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. I caught his eyes on me every time I sneaked a glance in his direction. It was unnerving, to say the least. When the class finally ended, I gathered my belongings hastily and made a beeline for the exit. I felt like prey, eager to escape the predator's sight. Weeks went by, and I did my best to forget that unsettling experience. Until one day I spotted him again, this time near the campus library. He was talking to another student, but his eyes followed me as I walked by. An icy shiver ran down my spine, and I picked up my pace, my heart racing. I wasn't sure if I was just being paranoid or if there was something genuinely off about this guy. All I knew was that I needed to stay vigilant. And so I started altering my routine, taking different paths to class and keeping an eye over my shoulder whenever I sensed someone behind me. Eventually, the semester ended, and I hoped that would be the end of the ordeal. But the unease lingered, and I couldn't shake the memory of those unsettling encounters. A few years later, I found myself sipping coffee and scrolling through the news on my laptop. That's when I saw the name and face that had haunted my thoughts. The headline hit me like a ton of bricks. College student arrested for sexual assault and attempted murder. The same guy, the one with the predatory gaze, was now behind bars for heinous crimes. As I read the details of the case, I couldn't believe the extent of his actions. The relief mingled with horror as I realized how close I had come to danger. Those unsettling glances weren't just products of an overactive imagination. They were the indicators of something far more sinister. It was a chilling reminder that gut feelings should never be ignored, and that sometimes the people who appear harmless can be the most dangerous. This happened to me in 2019. My buddies and I were always up for some adventure. One day, they came up with the idea to explore this old abandoned building on the edge of our campus. People said it was sketchy, but we thought it would be a fun challenge. One evening, we grabbed our flashlights and headed over. The building looked like it had seen better days, with broken windows and graffiti everywhere. It had a creepy vibe, but we laughed it off and went inside. We climbed a rickety staircase to the second floor, and that's when things took an unexpected turn. We heard shuffling noises from one of the rooms down the hallway. We froze, looking at each other nervously. My heart pounded in my chest as we strained our ears to hear better. Then, out of the darkness emerged a man. He was disheveled, with wild hair and a scruffy beard. He was carrying something shiny in his hand, and as he stepped closer, we saw it was a knife. Our hearts sank, and we realized we were in trouble. He didn't say a word, just looked at us with a cold, piercing gaze. We were frozen in fear, not knowing what to do. It felt like an eternity as we stood there, sizing each other up. Finally, one of my friends managed to stammer out, "Hello." The man's eyes flicked to him, and we could see a glint of something dangerous in his expression. He took a step closer, his grip on the knife tightening. In that moment, our survival instincts kicked in. Without saying a word, we slowly started backing away. Every step felt like it echoed in the silence, and I could feel my heart racing. We didn't take our eyes off the man for a second. As we reached the stairs, he stood there, still watching us. It was a tense standoff, and we knew we had to get out of there before things got worse. We carefully descended the stairs, never turning our backs on him. Once we were outside, we didn't look back. We ran like our lives depended on it, not stopping until we were a safe distance away. We didn't talk much about what had happened, but the memory of that man's cold gaze and the glint of the knife stayed with us. From then on, we learned to be more cautious and think twice before diving headfirst into the unknown. In 2016, me and my friends decided to hit up Six Flags over Georgia. We were all hyped for the rides, hoping for a day full of laughs and unforgettable memories. When we got to the park, the excitement was off the charts. The rides stood tall in the distance, all lit up in different colors, calling us to come have a blast. So we jumped in line for the roller coasters, our laughter blending with the buzz of the crowd. As the hours went by, we went on ride after ride, our hearts racing with each twist and turn. But as the sun started going down, the park started getting darker, and that added a kind of spooky vibe to the place. Still, we didn't let that get us down, and we carried on into the evening. It was getting kinda dusky when we decided to hop on the old carousel. With all the bright lights from the other rides and the fading daylight, the carousel looked a bit out of place, but it had a certain charm, so we gave it a shot. As the carousel spun around, I noticed this guy standing on the side, staring at us. He was pretty tall and was wearing a shabby suit, which was kinda weird for a place like this. The thing that got me was how he wasn't smiling or showing any kind of happiness like everyone else. I gave my friend a nudge and pointed out the guy. We exchanged some uneasy looks, wondering why he was so interested in us. I tried to shake off the strange feeling, thinking I was just being paranoid, and went on with the ride. When the carousel slowed down and we got off, we headed over to grab a bite. But no matter where we went, it felt like the guy was always somewhere nearby, watching us. It was a bit freaky, and we started thinking about maybe telling the park security. Feeling more and more creeped out, we decided to call it a day earlier than planned. But as we headed for the exit, we saw the guy trailing behind us. Panic set in, and we picked up the pace. Glancing back, we saw him picking up speed too, and that gave us the chills. We finally reached the security office, and we spilled the beans to the guards. They didn't waste time and took care of it. Turns out, the guy had a history of causing trouble in the park. His weird behavior got him a permanent ban. It was a relief seeing the guards lead him away. Our day of fun had turned into something eerie, reminding us that even in happy places, there can be a touch of darkness. This happened in late spring of 2012. Me and my friends decided to hit up Luna Park in New York. The evening was warm and inviting as we strolled into the park. Luna Park was alive with colors, music, and the chatter of excited visitors. We joined the lines for some of the best rides, the anticipation building with every step forward. As darkness started to fall, the park's lights sparkled even brighter, giving it an enchanting vibe. We were ready to conquer every coaster and spin every thrill ride. But one ride, the Ferris wheel, would turn our excitement into a spine-tingling experience. When we finally got on the Ferris wheel, We were expecting a leisurely ride with stunning views of the city lights. But as our gondola climbed higher and higher, something caught our attention. We noticed a lone figure in one of the abandoned gondolas. This person wasn't like the other riders. They were dressed in ragged clothes and had an unsettling, vacant stare. It was clear that something was off about them, and that feeling spread through our group like wildfire. As our gondola reached its peak, we saw the person slowly turn their head to look at us, and a shiver ran down our spines. We tried to brush off the uneasy feeling, thinking maybe it was just someone looking for a place to hide. But as our gondola descended, we saw them again, this time standing at the edge of the platform. They looked like they were on the verge of doing something dangerous. By now, fear was getting the best of us. We alerted the Ferris wheel operator, who radioed for security. As we continued our ride, we watched as the person disappeared into the shadows. But the sense of dread lingered, and our excitement had transformed into a mixture of anxiety and unease. When we finally got off the Ferris wheel, we were met by security personnel who assured us they were investigating the situation. We shared our experience and description of the person, hoping they would find them and ensure the safety of everyone at the park. We decided to call it a night, our desire for fun overshadowed by the strange encounter. Walking out of Luna Park, we glanced back one last time, half expecting to see that eerie figure. Thankfully, they were nowhere in sight. As we left the park, we couldn't shake off the feeling that Luna Park held secrets we might never fully understand. What was that person doing there? Were they just a lost soul or something more sinister? In the summer of 2011, I found myself working at an amusement park, a place known for its nostalgic rides and family-friendly atmosphere. But there was one ride that cast a shadow of unease over the place: the Tunnel of Terror. This old-school dark ride featured eerie scenes designed to startle and spook riders. It had been a staple at the park for decades, attracting visitors with its vintage charm and simple scares. However, there were rumors among the staff about an unsettling incident that had taken place many years ago. According to the park's lore, a young maintenance worker had gone missing inside the tunnel back in the late 1980s. The story went that he was doing routine repairs when he vanished without a trace. The park searched for weeks but found no sign of him. Eventually, the incident was chalked up to an accident, and the Tunnel of Terror continued to operate. One evening, during my shift as a ride operator, I found myself assigned to the Tunnel of Terror. As the sun set and the park's lights illuminated, casting eerie glows on the rides, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that accompanied the ride's history. I watched as groups of riders entered the mouth of the tunnel, their excited chatter fading into the darkness. The ride's unsettling scenes were accompanied by eerie sound effects, creating an atmosphere of suspense. But there was something else, an underlying tension that seemed to hang in the air. As the night progressed, I heard whispered conversations among the staff about strange occurrences inside the tunnel. Some claimed to have seen shadows moving in the corners of their vision, while others swore they heard faint footsteps echoing in the darkness. Curiosity got the best of me, and during a lull in riders, I decided to take a walk through the Tunnel of Terror myself. Armed with a flashlight, I ventured into the dimly lit corridors. The scenes were designed to be spooky but not terrifying, with animatronic figures and eerie decorations. As I walked deeper into the tunnel, my flashlight flickered, casting unsettling shadows on the walls. The air grew colder, and the sound of my own footsteps seemed to echo strangely. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, and a chill ran down my spine. Just as I was about to turn back, I heard a faint whisper, almost like a voice carried by the wind. My heart raced, and I shone my flashlight in the direction of the sound. My beam illuminated a maintenance door, slightly ajar. It was the door that led to the restricted maintenance area where the young worker had disappeared. My heart pounding, I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was filled with old equipment and spare parts, but there was something else, a cold breeze that shouldn't have been there. In the corner of the room, A faint outline seemed to shimmer, like a mirage in the dark. Before my eyes, the shimmering form took shape, revealing the figure of a young man dressed in maintenance overalls. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, and he stared at me with a mix of longing and sorrow. I was frozen in place, unable to move or speak. With a mournful look, the figure slowly faded away, leaving behind an icy breeze that enveloped me. I stumbled back, my heart racing, and fled the maintenance area, not looking back until I was outside the tunnel. I never spoke of what I saw that night, but the memory of the young maintenance worker's apparition remains etched in my mind. The tunnel of terror continued to operate, but for me, it will forever be a place where the boundary between reality and the supernatural seemed to blur. Back in my college days, urban exploring was all the rage. One summer, we decided to take on an old, dilapidated asylum that had been closed for decades. The stories surrounding the place were chilling, but we were young and fearless, thinking we could handle anything. It was a cloudy afternoon when we arrived at the asylum. The towering brick walls were covered in graffiti, a testament to the countless explorers who had come before us. We slipped through a gap in the fence and made our way inside. The air was thick with a musty scent, and the silence was suffocating. As we ventured deeper into the building, we discovered rooms filled with old hospital equipment, rusted beds, and rotting furniture. The corridors seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls lined with peeling paint and faded wallpaper. We snapped photos and shared nervous laughs, trying to mask the unease creeping up on us. But as the sun began to set, a sense of dread settled in. Our flashlights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the once faint sounds of creaking floorboards became more pronounced. It was as if the building itself was coming alive. We decided to head back to the entrance, but something was off. The path we had taken seemed to twist and turn in ways we hadn't remembered. Panic set in as we realized we were lost. Every hallway looked the same. Every door led to more darkness. Our jokes and laughter turned into hushed whispers. In our desperation to find an exit, we stumbled upon a room that seemed untouched by time. It was filled with old patient files, each one telling a haunting tale of suffering and neglect. The atmosphere was oppressive, and a feeling of being watched sent shivers down our spines. Then, a sound echoed through the corridor, a distant, eerie whisper that froze us in our tracks. We strained our ears, heartbeats pounding in our chests. Another whisper, followed by faint footsteps. Panic took over, and we ran in the opposite direction, praying to escape whatever was lurking in the shadows. Finally, after what felt like hours of running, we burst through a doorway and found ourselves back in the main entrance. Gasping for air, we scrambled through the gap in the fence and collapsed on the grass outside. Only then did we realize that we hadn't encountered another soul in the building. We were alone. We vowed never to return to that asylum, and the memories of that night haunted us for years. As urban explorers, we had faced our worst fears: the unknown, the supernatural, the feeling of being trapped in a place where time had stood still. It was a lesson that no matter how fearless we thought we were, some places are best left untouched, and some horrors can never truly be explained. For some background, this happened in 2014. In my hometown of Detroit, urban exploring was a way to reconnect with the city's history. It was a way to step into the past, to walk through forgotten places that had once been bustling centers of industry. My friends and I had heard rumors about an abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city. Intrigued, we decided to explore it one summer afternoon. The factory stood like a forgotten giant, its windows shattered, and its walls covered in layers of graffiti. The air was thick with the scent of rust and decay as we stepped inside, each cautious footfall echoing through the vast space. Broken machinery and discarded tools littered the floor, and the silence was punctuated only by the occasional drip of water from a leaky roof. As we ventured deeper into the factory, we stumbled upon rooms that hinted at its past life. Offices with peeling wallpaper and old filing cabinets, signs of the workers who once called this place their second home. In one corner, we found a bulletin board covered in faded Polaroids, snapshots of faces long forgotten. But our exploration took a chilling turn when we heard voices, faint at first, but growing steadily louder. Panic set in as we realized that we weren't alone. We ducked behind a stack of crates, hearts pounding in our chests. Through a crack in the wood, we watched as a group of men entered the factory. Their faces were hardened, their demeanor unfriendly. They seemed to be discussing something, their voices a mixture of anger and frustration. We strained our ears, trying to make out their words. It became clear that they were involved in something illegal, something that sent a shiver down our spines. We were just urban explorers, adventurers seeking a glimpse into the past. And now we found ourselves unwitting witnesses to something far more dangerous. As the men moved through the factory, we tried to stay hidden, our breath held in anticipation. It was a nerve-wracking game of hide and seek, each passing minute feeling like an eternity. Finally, they left, disappearing into the same shadows that had concealed us. With cautious steps, we emerged from our hiding spot, our hearts still racing. We knew we had to leave, to get out of there before they returned. As we slipped out of the factory and into the fading daylight, we couldn't shake the feeling that we had stumbled upon something far darker than we had ever expected. We never returned to that abandoned factory, the memories of that day serving as a stark reminder that urban exploring wasn't always a harmless adventure. In a city with a history as complex as Detroit's, there were stories hidden in every corner, some of them more sinister than others. As we left behind the factory and the secrets it held, we knew that our curiosity had led us into a world we were never meant to see. Back in my hometown in rural Tennessee, there's this abandoned house that's been a magnet for local kids like us. This old place with its peeling paint, broken windows, and wild garden has this eerie vibe that pulls you in. It's like a treasure chest of secrets just waiting to be opened. So one lazy summer day, me and my buddies decided it was high time to check out the abandoned house. We'd heard all kinds of spooky stories about it, but we weren't buying into the whole haunted thing. Armed with our flashlights and youthful courage, we headed to that old house that had fueled our imaginations for ages. The sun was setting as we cautiously pushed the creaky front door open. The air was all musty and dusty, like it hadn't been disturbed in ages. Our flashlight beams danced around, revealing old photos and furniture covered with white sheets. It was like the clock had stopped in there. As we moved deeper inside, this weird feeling started creeping up. The floors squeaked underfoot, and the sound of the wind outside made this eerie background noise. It felt like the past was speaking to us in hushed tones, telling stories we weren't meant to hear. Then we stumbled upon this room that was different from the rest. The walls were covered in these intricate paintings, like murals, telling tales of happiness, heartbreak, and love. It was so strange, seeing these vibrant scenes amidst the decay. We were captivated, wondering about the person behind those brushstrokes and why they'd been left behind. Just as daylight started fading, we decided it was time to leave. But just as we were turning to go, this faint voice filled the air. It was like a whisper, soft and sorrowful, but we couldn't quite make out the words. That's when we realized we weren't alone in that house. Our flashlight beams flickered over to the doorway. And there it was, an actual figure standing there, dressed in old-timey clothes, hidden in the shadows. Our hearts started racing as this figure began moving toward us, slow and deliberate. We were rooted to the spot, unable to look away or even comprehend what we were seeing. Then adrenaline kicked in, and we hightailed it out of that abandoned house, our footsteps pounding in the night. We didn't dare look back, but the memory of those haunting whispers and that mysterious figure stayed with us. It's a reminder that some things are better off staying hidden, buried in the past. Back in 2019, I was still pretty new to this Airbnb thing. You know, where you stay at someone else's place while they're not there. Sounded cool to me, so I decided to try it out for a solo trip to New Orleans. After scrolling through a bunch of options, I settled on this cute old cottage right in the French Quarter. Looked charming in the pics, and the guy, Theodore, seemed friendly. Little did I know, this Airbnb adventure would go from exciting to seriously creepy real quick. I flew into New Orleans, all excited to explore the city and experience its vibrant culture. When I got to Theodore's place, it seemed even cozier in person. It had that vintage vibe, with antique furniture and creaky wooden floors. I thought it was charming at first, but soon, it started to feel more like a set from a horror movie. Theodore was there to welcome me, a middle-aged guy with a friendly smile. He showed me around, gave me some tips on where to go in the city, and handed me the keys. Everything seemed fine until he mentioned the basement. "Now, you won't need to go down there," he said, his tone suddenly turning serious. "It's just storage, and it's off-limits for guests." I remember nodding, thinking it was odd but not dwelling on it. After all, I wasn't planning on snooping around in someone's basement. I went about my business, exploring the French Quarter, savoring gumbo, and enjoying live jazz. But each time I returned to the cottage, I couldn't shake an eerie feeling. One night, as I lay in bed trying to sleep, I heard something. It was faint, like a distant whisper, but it was persistent. Curiosity got the better of me, and I followed the sound, which seemed to be coming from beneath the floor. I realized it was coming from the basement that Theodore had warned me about. My heart pounding, I crept down the creaky stairs, guided only by the dim light from my phone. The whispers grew louder, and I strained to make out the words. It was a group of voices, chanting something in a language I couldn't understand. The air was thick with an unsettling energy, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I tiptoed back upstairs, my mind racing. What was happening in that basement? The next day, I couldn't look Theodore in the eye, my fear getting the best of me. I decided to cut my trip short, make some excuse about needing to return home early. As I left the cottage, Theodore's smile seemed more sinister than friendly. I never found out what was in that basement, and I didn't want to. I just wanted to put the creepy Airbnb experience behind me and never look back. That charming little cottage in the French Quarter turned out to be a place I'd rather forget. A couple of summers ago, I planned a weekend getaway with my friends to the picturesque town of Sedona, Arizona. We wanted to experience the famous red rock formations and the serene desert landscape. Airbnb seemed like the perfect option for accommodations, so I booked a cozy cabin nestled in the heart of the desert. When we arrived, we were in awe of the cabin's rustic charm and the breathtaking views it offered. The owner, an elderly woman named Martha, greeted us warmly and showed us around. She mentioned that the cabin had been in her family for generations, and it was evident that she had a deep connection to the place. The first night was peaceful as we sat around a bonfire, sharing stories and stargazing. However, as the night wore on, we started hearing strange noises coming from the nearby woods. It sounded like faint whispers carried by the desert winds. We brushed it off as our imaginations playing tricks on us and went to bed. The following day, we embarked on a challenging hike through the Red Rocks. It was an exhausting but rewarding experience, and by the time we returned to the cabin, we were all looking forward to a good night's sleep. That's when things took a bizarre turn. As we settled into our respective rooms, we heard a knock at the door. Assuming it was Martha, we went to answer, but there was no one there. Perplexed, We checked the surroundings, but there was no sign of anyone. We dismissed it as a prank, or perhaps a mischievous animal, and returned to our rooms. Throughout the night, the knocks persisted, growing louder and more insistent. It was as if someone desperately wanted to get our attention. Fear crept in as we realized that the nearest neighbor was miles away, and no one should be out there at this hour. We decided to call Martha, hoping she could shed some light on the situation. When we explained the strange occurrences, her voice trembled as she told us to stay inside and lock all the doors and windows. She promised to come over right away. We followed her advice, huddled together in the living room, anxiously waiting for Martha's arrival. The knocks on the door continued, but we dared not open it. When Martha finally arrived, she was pale and visibly shaken. She explained that there had been unsettling incidents in the area lately. A man, whose identity remained a mystery, had been stalking Airbnb guests in the region. She feared that we had become the latest victims of his disturbing obsession. We decided to contact the local authorities, and they dispatched a patrol car to investigate. While we waited, the relentless knocking continued, and our anxiety reached its peak. We whispered among ourselves, wondering if this stalker was watching us from the shadows. When the police arrived, they conducted a thorough search of the area, but found no trace of the intruder. They'd assured us that they would increase patrols in the region, and advised us to stay vigilant. Despite the reassurance, our vacation was marred by the unsettling presence of the unknown stalker. We couldn't shake the feeling that someone was lurking in the shadows, watching our every move. When we finally left the cabin, we were relieved to put the eerie experience behind us, but the memory of that disturbing weekend in Sedona would haunt us for a long time to come. A few years back, I decided to take a solo trip to a remote cabin in the woods of northern Michigan. It was a much-needed escape from the hustle and bustle of daily life, and I found the perfect secluded cabin on Airbnb. The cabin was nestled deep in the woods, surrounded by towering pine trees and miles away from the nearest neighbor. It was the ideal place to disconnect from the world and enjoy the tranquility of nature. The owner, a friendly elderly man named Mr. Thompson, greeted me upon arrival and handed me the keys. The first 2 nights at the cabin were peaceful and serene. I spent my days exploring the forest trails and my evenings reading by the crackling fire. It was everything I had hoped for, until the third night. At precisely 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by a loud knocking on the cabin door. My heart raced as I stumbled out of bed, trying to make sense of the eerie sound. I quickly grabbed a flashlight and cautiously approached the front door. The knocking continued, now accompanied by a chilling sound, sharp, deliberate scratching. It was as if someone was running a knife across the wooden surface. Fear gripped me as I held my breath, peering through the peephole. There, on the other side of the door, stood a figure shrouded in darkness. My mind raced with fear and confusion. Who could be out there in the middle of nowhere at this ungodly hour? I considered calling the police, but my phone had no reception in the isolated cabin. The scratching grew louder and more frantic, and I knew I had to act fast. My only option was to confront the intruder. I grabbed a heavy fireplace poker and, with trembling hands, flung open the door. Before me stood a man, disheveled and wild-eyed. In one hand, he held a gleaming knife, and in the other, a torn, blood-stained piece of paper. His lips quivered as he muttered incomprehensible words. Terrified, I demanded to know what he wanted. He thrust the bloodied paper toward me, and in a shaky voice, he explained that he had stumbled upon the cabin while fleeing from someone, or something, that was pursuing him. He begged for shelter, claiming that his life was in danger. My heart went out to the desperate stranger, and I hesitated for a moment before reluctantly letting him inside. I couldn't ignore the fear in his eyes. As we huddled together in the dimly lit cabin, he explained his harrowing story. He had been on a solo camping trip when he encountered a group of menacing individuals deep in the woods. They had chased him relentlessly, and he believed they meant to harm him. We spent the rest of the night in fearful silence, listening for any signs of the pursuers. The stranger kept watch with the knife clutched tightly in his hand, while I anxiously waited for dawn to break. When morning finally arrived, we cautiously ventured outside, but there was no sign of the mysterious pursuers. The stranger thanked me for my kindness and swiftly disappeared into the woods, leaving me with the chilling memory of that fateful night. To this day, I have no idea who or what was after the man or if he truly posed a threat. That night, deep in the heart of the Michigan wilderness, I learned that sometimes the most terrifying horrors are the ones that remain unsolved, lurking just beyond the cabin door. I was in 6th grade, small, really poor school in California. That morning, we had a lockdown drill, super common and recognizable at this school. All the teachers would warn us ahead of time to save the panic. A short buzzer would go off, and then our principal would go on the intercom and give this huge spiel about how this was a lockdown drill. That when a real lockdown came by, the buzzer would play for longer, and she wouldn't do any announcements. We all shut the curtains and sat in the classroom. It was over before we knew it, and the day went by. But as the day progresses, this picture kept popping up. From the glances I got, it was a picture of some notebook paper. I assumed it was something personal somebody lost, and everybody was just being dicks and showing it around, so I didn't even ask to see it. Finally, it was the second to last period of the day. I ducked out of the class to use the restroom. But while I was at the sink, the buzzer went off again. It was so long I wanted to cover my ears. No announcements, no explanation. A real lockdown. You're supposed to stay where you are. In my case, hop on top of a toilet and lock my stall. But I was not about to sit here and wait for whatever intruder could be here to barge into the bathroom while they contemplated or recouped. Screw that. I ran out of the bathroom, hoping to go back to my classroom, but it was locked, and there was no way my teacher was letting me back in. I was panicking, so I kept going down the hall, trying each and every handle I could. Finally, I found this other girl sobbing as she kept trying to open the same handle, I assume her natural class. I grabbed her hand and led her down my path as I kept trying doors. After only a minute, though it felt like hours, we found an empty computer lab whose door was open. We went inside and hid until the entire thing was over. The school tried to keep it hush-hush, but we all eventually found out a kid brought his dad's gun to school because he was mad, but then realized he didn't want to hurt anybody. He hid in the bathrooms and called the police on himself. I think the scariest part was the picture I was talking about earlier. I found out, after everybody figured out what happened, that it was his list. I was number 9. Back in 2009, I was a high school student at a relatively small school in the suburbs. The campus was nestled in a quiet neighborhood, and the idea of a school lockdown was something none of us had ever seriously considered. It was just another ordinary day, or so we thought. It was mid-morning when the intercom crackled to life, and our principal's voice came through.
Lockdown, lockdown. This is an emergency alert. Please follow lockdown procedures. Go into the nearest room or building, lock the door, and turn off all lights.
The initial confusion in the classroom quickly gave way to a tense hush as our teacher, Mrs. Johnson, moved to lock the door and draw the blinds. None of us knew what was happening, but the seriousness in our teacher's eyes sent a chill down our spines. We huddled in silence, the only sound being the muffled whispers and worried glances exchanged among us. The minutes dragged on, and it felt like an eternity. The school intercom remained eerily silent, leaving us in the dark about the nature of the threat. Some students tried to check their phones discreetly, but the lack of information persisted. Mrs. Johnson, a seasoned teacher with a calm demeanor, tried her best to keep us calm. Outside our classroom, We could hear faint sirens approaching. The anxiety in the room intensified as we realized that this was more than just a drill. The sirens grew louder, and the distant sound of police radios added to the tension. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the hallway, and our hearts collectively skipped a beat. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate. Mrs. Johnson motioned for us to stay silent, and we clung to each other, our breaths shallow and rapid. The footsteps grew closer, and panic threatened to overtake us. In the dimly lit classroom, the seconds stretched into minutes as we listened to the intruder moving through the hallway. It felt like we were living a nightmare, trapped in our own little world of fear and uncertainty. Just when it seemed like we couldn't bear the suspense any longer, the intercom crackled back to life. It was the voice of the principal, her voice trembling as she informed us that the police were on the scene and that the threat had been neutralized. Relief washed over us like a tidal wave, and tears of fear turned into tears of gratitude. The lockdown was eventually lifted, and we were reunited with our anxious parents outside the school gates. It turned out that a troubled individual had entered the school premises with a weapon, but the quick response of law enforcement had prevented a tragedy. It was a bone-chilling winter's day in 2017 when the horrors of a school lockdown unfolded before my eyes. I found myself trapped in the dimly lit bathroom stall, the scent of disinfectant lingering in the air as an ominous reminder of the everyday routines that had been shattered. The intercom crackled to life, and the principal's strained voice pierced the silence, urging all students and staff to seek immediate shelter. Panic surged through me as I realized that the casual refuge of the bathroom had become my makeshift sanctuary. I huddled on the cold tile floor, my breath visible in the frigid air, clutching my phone like a lifeline. The only sounds were the distant echoes of sirens and the muffled cries of frightened students. Suddenly, the tranquility of the bathroom was shattered by a series of deafening crashes. My heart pounded in my chest as if it were trying to escape the impending horror. It felt as if the world had plunged into darkness, and the only illumination came from the flickering fluorescent lights above. The chilling echoes of relentless pounding reverberated through the restroom, each blow sending shockwaves of fear through my veins. Someone was outside, desperately trying to break into the stalls. Panic set in as I realized the threat was right on the other side of my flimsy stall door. In the dim light, I saw the shadowy figure of a man moving erratically. His erratic mutterings and deranged laughter made my skin crawl. I clamped a hand over my mouth, stifling my breath as I tried to make myself as small and silent as possible. The man's voice grew louder and more unhinged with each passing second. He began rattling the latch on my stall, his fingers clawing at the door. I could see his silhouette contorting in twisted frustration as he attempted to force his way in. Terror gripped me, and my mind raced to find a way out of this nightmarish scenario. I fumbled for my phone, fingers trembling as I dialed 911, silently praying for help. The operator's voice was a distant lifeline as I whispered my location and the dire circumstances. As I clung to that fragile connection, the intruder's relentless assault on the stall door continued. My world had shrunk to the confines of that tiny space, the walls closing in around me. Suddenly, the bathroom was bathed in the harsh glare of police flashlights. Commands to drop his weapon filled the air, and the pounding ceased. Relief washed over me as I heard the man being apprehended and handcuffed, his frenzied protests echoing down the hall. The lockdown was eventually lifted, and I emerged from the bathroom, shaken but safe. It was later revealed that the intruder had no affiliation with the school, but his motives remained shrouded in madness. A while ago, I decided to use DoorDash for a late-night meal. It was raining heavily outside, and I didn't want to go out. I ordered some comfort food and waited. The estimated delivery time was around 30 minutes. As I sat in my dimly lit living room, The sound of the rain hitting the windows added to the eerie atmosphere. I was watching TV to pass the time, occasionally checking the app for updates on my order. About 20 minutes in, I received a notification that my food had been picked up. However, the strange part was that the delivery driver's location on the app wasn't moving closer to my house. It was as if they were driving in circles, going nowhere. I felt a sense of unease creeping in. As more time passed, I started to get a weird feeling in the pit of my stomach. The driver's car icon on the app was moving erratically, sometimes disappearing altogether. It was unnerving. I tried to shake off the unease, thinking it might be a technical glitch, but then my phone rang and I jumped. It was an unknown number. Hesitantly, I answered. A deep, raspy voice on the other end whispered,
I'm close, very close.
My heart pounded in my chest. I asked who it was, but there was only silence, followed by heavy breathing. Terrified, I checked the app again, and the driver's location was now just a block away from my house. I could hear a car slowly approaching outside my window. I quickly canceled the order and called the police, explaining the eerie phone call and the driver's strange behavior. The dispatcher assured me they'd send an officer right away. I peeked out my window and saw a car parked down the street, the engine running. There was no sign of the driver. As I waited for the police, fear gnawed at me. After the police arrived, they searched the area and found a note under a nearby rock. It said,
You're lucky you called the cops.
Reading that note sent a shiver down my spine. It was clear this wasn't a normal situation. The police promised to keep looking into it, but that note only made things more mysterious. Who was this driver, and why did they leave such a scary message? In the weeks that followed, I couldn't stop feeling like someone was watching me. Every car that passed by and every stranger in my neighborhood made me nervous. I was always on edge, worried that the creepy driver might come back. To this day, I still don't know who was behind it all. Back when I worked as a DoorDash driver, I had my fair share of ordinary deliveries. You know, the usual routine of picking up orders and dropping them off. But there was this one time that still gives me the creeps whenever I think about it. It was a cold, rainy night in the middle of winter. I got a notification on my app for a new order. The destination was a small, old house on the outskirts of town. The note from the customer was what struck me as odd. It said,
Just leave the food on the doorstep. Do not ring the doorbell.
I shrugged it off as a customer's preference and accepted the order. I headed to the restaurant to pick up the food, the smell of warm, delicious meals filling my car. The raindrops splattered against the windshield as I drove to the address. As I got closer to the house, I couldn't help but notice how eerie it looked. The place was in disrepair, with overgrown bushes and a porch light that kept flickering like it was about to give out any moment. It sent a shiver down my spine, but I pushed the unease aside. I reached the house and followed the customer's instructions, placing the food on the doorstep as gently as possible. Just as I turned to make my exit, I heard a faint whisper behind me. The voice was barely audible, and I couldn't make out the words, but it sent chills down my spine. I spun around, thinking the customer had come to collect the order, but there was no one there. The porch remained empty, the door firmly shut. I felt a knot in my stomach and decided it was time to leave, not wanting to stick around any longer. As I drove away from that unsettling house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously off. The entire experience left me with an overwhelming sense of unease. I never received another order for that address, and honestly, I wasn't too eager to. Even now, I can't help but wonder what was really going on in that creepy house on that dark, rainy night. It was a typical Friday evening when I accepted an order that would forever change how I felt about DoorDash. The delivery was scheduled for a small suburban house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. The app showed a decent tip, so I thought it'd be a routine drop-off. The address led me to a quaint, well-kept home with a well-lit porch. The note from the customer read,
Please leave the food on the doorstep and ring the doorbell. Do not enter.
Seemed like an easy task, right? I collected the order from the restaurant and made my way to the location. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, with the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze. As I approached the house, I noticed all the curtains were drawn, which struck me as unusual. But hey, customers had their quirks, so I brushed it off. I rang the doorbell and waited. A few moments later, the door creaked open just a crack, revealing a pair of cautious eyes. A voice from behind the door said,
Set the food down and back away slowly.
I obliged, placing the bag of food on the doorstep and taking a step back. As I turned to leave, the door suddenly burst open, and I felt a force push me from behind. I stumbled forward, barely catching myself before I fell. A group of people rushed out, clad in dark clothing and masks, all holding cameras. Panic coursed through me as I realized I had walked into some sort of setup. They started laughing and taunting me. One of them, wearing a sinister clown mask, pointed a camera in my face and asked how scared I was. I was furious and scared out of my mind, but I tried to keep my composure. I told them to stop the nonsense and let me go. That's when things took a darker turn. The clown-masked person pulled out a knife, and the laughter turned into menacing whispers. They circled around me, and it was clear they had no intentions of just scaring me anymore. Desperation kicked in, and I made a run for it. I sprinted down the dimly lit street, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I could hear their footsteps behind me, their malicious laughter echoing in the night. Luckily, I managed to reach a well-lit area where a group of people were hanging out. I yelled for help, and the masked figures retreated into the shadows, disappearing into the night. I called the police, and they arrived shortly after. I gave them a description of what had happened, but there was little they could do. The whole ordeal left me shaken and terrified, making me question whether I'd ever want to continue working as a DoorDash driver. From that day on, I approach every delivery with caution, knowing that not every order is what it seems.